Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be with you today. Thank you very much for joining this all-important webinar, and it's a pleasure for me to be with you as usual. My name is Media Simondekwa, and I'm head of content at Smart Procurement World. I really don't know about you, but I'm so excited about this session this morning about e-auctions, because think about it, finally we are starting to really get practical, right? We have been talking about COVID, this virtual world, for a very long time now. And a lot of you guys have even emailed me to say, can we start having tools in these webinars? Can we have an approach that we can start using, to learn to live with COVID? And we have responded. Today, we are going to talk about e-auctions. And when you hear about auctions, we think of all sorts of things. And so the purpose of this session is to show us how practical they are, how we can go about it, and how they can even help us save money for our organizations in these difficult times. So we have got two speakers, and they will have two presentations separately. The first one is Manav. And Manav, maybe you can come through as well. It's good to be with you. And the next one is an industry expert who is going to just talk about the practicalities of going about it within an organization, especially when you talk to your executive levels and to create buy-in. So I'm very excited to hear from you, Manav. So you introduce yourself very briefly. But before we can go on, I just wanted to pull off a poll here. I just want to know how many people in the audience are actually acquainted with e-auctions. So if we can just quickly have a poll, please, then we can get a sense of what is happening here. There you go, very easy, choose your option. All right, we'll give it another second. And yeah, I think everybody has submitted and we'll share the result later on. So Manav, I hand over to you now very briefly. What can people expect? Who is Manav? And yeah, so you can see there again, 56% of the people in here don't know what you're going to tell us, to talk to us about. So please just give us a sense, introduce yourself very briefly, your organization, and move into your presentation. And I know Chris from MassMart is also here as a special guest to this webinar. So from an industry perspective, it's gonna be very practical. I'm looking forward to that. Manav, over to you now.
Thank you, Mirishi. Please just confirm that you can hear me clearly.
I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So Mirishi, thanks for that. And the poll that we just did was spot on. Whenever we talk to clients, about 1 in 3 clients say that they've never actually, well, 1 in 3 clients actually say that they have kind of tested the e-auctions before. Yeah. And 2 in 3 clients says, they know about it, but they've never tested it. There's obviously a lot of sort of myths out there in terms of, what e-auctions are and whether they're good, whether they're not good, how to go about it, where to start and all of that. And that's what we're going to talk about today, right? We're going to try and demystify the whole concept of e-auction. We're going to dispel some myths about e-auction and, give everybody a good overview of what e-auctions are, where do we begin? And then Chris will come in and talk about some success stories with a lot of e-auctions that he's done. And Chris and I have done quite a few e-auctions together as well. So as introduction, my name is Manav. I'm from Letsema Consulting. I am the associate partner and practice lead for procurement advisory and digital procurement. And personally, I have done over 50 e-auctions across multiple geographies, across multiple platforms, and across multiple categories, whether you talk about direct categories or indirect categories. I've pretty much done almost all categories through e-auctions. So having introduced myself, Chris, maybe do you want to just quickly introduce yourself and then we can begin with some of the content.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Manav. Also just want to confirm that you can hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Yeah, so morning, everyone. Just a brief introduction. My name's Chris Giorgio. I work for Massmart in the procurement function, reporting into our vice president for procurement. And as Manav said, we've done quite a few eAuctions together, and we've got an eAuction program running across the group. I predominantly focus today on things like construction, FM, equipment, and operations for the group. But from an eAuctions perspective, as you'll see from the presentation, the responsibility spans across both those type of indirect commodities to direct commodities as well. I'll talk you through what we did at Massmart and Walmart and how we view eAuctions and so on. So happy to help you out and to be here today. Thanks.
Cool, thanks, Chris. I've just put my slides up so that we can start with some of the content. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can see your slide.
All right, okay. So I think let's just begin with introducing eAuctions for those who have never dealt with or never actually have experience of conducting eAuction. So what is an eAuction? I'm sure everybody knows what an auction is. But eAuction is basically, it's a process where suppliers compete amongst themselves and bid amongst themselves on an electronic platform, on an electronic and interactive platform, until either the last bid is placed or until the bidding window of the auction sort of timing is over. So it's pretty much having a real auction on an electronic platform, on an interactive platform. Obviously based on certain rules that you set for the eAuction. So there's two types of eAuction. There's a bit of background noise there. If everybody could just please mute yourself, thank you. So there's two types of auctions or eAuctions. One is your forward auctions and reverse auctions. So on forward auctions, I'm not sure if if any of you have bought any stuff from Bid or Buy or eBay. Which is pretty much a very simplistic example of a forward auction where the price goes up and the highest bidder or the highest bid actually wins the auction, right? So that's pretty much the auction, forward auction when the price keeps going up. And the reverse auction is the opposite of that, and it's where the procurement fraternity pretty much uses the reverse auction where the price goes down, because you obviously want suppliers to reduce your price and not to increase their price. So the reverse auctions is where the price is going down. And suppliers are bidding and competing, and in some cases, in most cases, the cheapest price wins, right? But we're going to see later on that it's not necessarily that you need to award bid to the cheapest price. So that's pretty much in a very simplistic way the reverse auctions and forward auctions. Going forward, we get asked a lot of questions as to whether eAuction is a standalone tool that you can use, or do you actually use that as part of your sourcing process? So let's have a look at your typical sourcing process that you follow if you want to order or if you want to buy any commodity category or any service, right? So whether it's a good or a service, you typically follow a sourcing process where you scope and you define the requirements or the specification of the product or the service that you want to buy. Then you develop the RFQ or the RFP documents and do the full market engagement of releasing the RFP document to the market and getting the bid responses back from suppliers. And then you do the evaluation of the responses, both technical, non-pricing evaluation, as well as pricing evaluation. And then you do negotiations with the suppliers, and mostly the negotiations happen face-to-face or over telephone or over Microsoft Teams, and negotiations typically take 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, depending on the complexity of the service or the good that you're buying. And then finally, you do a contract award to the winning bidder, right? So this is your typical sourcing process. Now, where does eAuction fit in? eAuction is pretty much a negotiation tool, right? Once you've gone through your sourcing process of identifying or qualifying your bidders or qualifying your suppliers, eAuction gives you the ability to interact with the bidders or the qualified bidders to actually have them submit their best and final offer through an interactive bidding tool, right? Now, why would you use eAuction as a negotiation tool or a negotiation instrument as part of your RFP process? Because on average, eAuctions have shown and have proven to deliver greater savings than your face-to-face traditional negotiations. And obviously, they greatly reduce the time, the negotiation lead times. Typically, your negotiations would take 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whereas an interactive bidding or an eAuction process to submit your best and final offer could take 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or even an hour, right? So it greatly reduces the time for you to actually negotiate, with your suppliers. And as I mentioned, eAuction gives bidders an opportunity to submit the best and final offer. So having your last round of pricing negotiation and getting the bidders to submit your best and final offer, eAuction, is a really good instrument to allow the suppliers to do that. And finally, the outcome of the eAuction can be incorporated into your evaluation, for award, right? So you don't necessarily have to award the auction or award the contract to the cheapest bidder. If you set the rules up front as part of the RFP process, you can actually, take the pricing or the best and final offers from eAuction, put them into your evaluation, matrix, and then make a final judgment or final award based on the overall criteria rather than just the pricing that you've been able to achieve through eAuction. Right. So now I hope you have a good understanding of how to use eAuction or where to use eAuction in your sourcing process. You can use it as a standalone tool. If you want to do a very, very quick negotiation, you can call the suppliers, get the initial bids from them, and do a very quick event. That's if you want to do a very quick negotiation over a period of a few days. Or you can incorporate eAuction as part of your entire sourcing process and get your best and final offers and final bids from suppliers through an interactive bidding process. Right, so this question we get asked a lot. What can be eAuction? Obviously, there's some preconceived notions out there to say eAuctions are only good for commodities or only products. You can't buy services through eAuctions, but let's see what some of the categories that can be eAuction. So typically we use these 3 questions, right, to validate can an auction be done or not, right? Firstly, is there competition of 2 or more suppliers, right? The category or the product or the service that you're buying, is there competition out there in the market? Second question is the specification or the requirement clear, right? Because you want the suppliers you want to evaluate the suppliers and do an apples to apples comparison. And to have that, you need to have your specification or the requirement absolutely clear and understood by all your suppliers. And finally, can a clear and transparent award be made, right? These 3 questions, if the answer to all these 3 questions is yes, then we say, why not eAuction, right? If the answer to these 3 questions is yes, eAuction can be done. All right. In terms of categories that have been eAuctioned, I mean, anything and everything wherever there is competition can be eAuctioned. So this is one chart that I picked out from Spend Matters that shows some of the categories that have been eAuctioned and some of the savings that organizations across the globe have been able to achieve through eAuction. So talking from HR services to recruitment to fleet, logistics, beverages, air freight, sea freight, HVAC, printing, marketing, anything and everything where there is competition and where the specifications of the requirements are clear can be eAuction, right? Personally, in terms of the categories that I have worked on eAuction, so these are some of the categories that I have executed auctions on: raw materials, direct materials, packaging and consumables, very easy to eAuction. IT hardware and services, very easy to eAuction, right? So from an ease of implementation perspective, those are some of the easy categories to eAuction. And the savings that we achieve or we have seen is anywhere between 5 and 12%. That's the range of savings that we've been able to deliver. Some of the other categories that I have eAuction: professional services, so different types of professional services, even marketing, whether it's creative, whether it's media, whether it's print, all of that has been and can be e-auction. And finally, logistics. Logistics is probably, and this is one of the auction that Chris and I did together, it's probably the most complex auction to actually structure and execute. But at the end of the day, the amount of market information and knowledge that you gather by doing the logistics auction, and the savings that we were able to achieve, it was just absolutely fantastic. So yes, I mean, complex categories such as logistics can also be auctioned if they are structured properly, and if there is a clear strategy of how that e-auction needs to be executed. Right. Cool. So now that we know that anything and everything, wherever there is competition, can be e-auctioned, let's look at some of the type of reverse auctions and what type of auction is applicable in what sort of scenarios or situations. Right? So there are 4 main type of e-auctions out there, and the 4 are English, dynamic, Dutch, and Japanese. Right. So these are the 4 different formats of e-auctions. And let's look at each one of them as to where each one of them is applicable. So English is the most simplistic auction. This is what you get on eBay or bid or buy, English forward auction, where the price goes up and you're able to see what the winning bid is, and all you need to do is outbid the winning bidder, right? So you can see the price at all, the winning price at any given time. There needs to be, minimum 3 suppliers in this scenario, and this is typically a single source event. That means at the end of the day, the winning bidder, you're gonna award to one single bidder. This is not a preferred format for most organizations because bidders are able to see the best price, and obviously you don't want all suppliers to see what the best price that you're contracting at. And also in this format, you have to award the contract to the winning bidder, right? So this is the most simplistic auction, but not a preferred option because of the fact that the winning bid is visible to all the bidders. The second one and the most common auction type is dynamic auction, where you can actually set quite a few rules in the auction where the price is not visible. You can show the rank. You can also show color or rank to the bidders to see where they are actually where they stand or what they're ranked. You can also set reserve price to try and force the bidders to actually meet a certain target price that you have in mind. And you can set rules as to what information you can share with the suppliers or the bidders once that reserve price is reached. So this format really forces or urges the suppliers to actually go to and meet the reserve price, and then they can see their rank or whatever setting that you have chosen in terms of what information is visible to them. This allows for multiple sourcing. That means this allows for dual vendor strategy or multi-vendor strategy. That means if you want to award to top 2 vendors, top 3 vendors, you want to split the business and award to top 2 vendor to sort of diversify your risk. This format allows for that. The third one is the Japanese auction. This is slightly different from the top 2, and this is where all the bidders come in and you start at a price and you start reducing the price. So every 2 minutes, let's say you drop a price by 10 rands or 100 rands. And all the bidders need to do is opt out. So as the price is going down, if they want to opt out, the bidders keep opting out, and the last man standing or the last woman standing pretty much wins the bid. You can also have multi-sourcing strategy over here to say the last 2 standing or the last 3 standing suppliers, you want to contract with them again to diversify your risk, right? So this is where it's actually where the bidders are not actually bidding for a price. They're actually saying they want to stay at that price or they want to opt out of the auction, right, at that price. And then finally, the most brutal, and I call it brutal, of all the formats is the Dutch auction, which is you start the auction and you start increasing the price, and the first bidder to actually accept the price wins the auction. This puts the maximum pressure on bidders, and like I said, psychologically, this is probably the most brutal auction, and purely because it has the the whole thing of fear of missing out, right? FOMO. So you start the bidding and you start increasing the price, and the first supplier to actually accept your price gets the bid. In this this format, we typically see a lot of incumbent suppliers actually winning because they don't want to lose the business. So they're the first one to pull the trigger or hit the yes button. And this is not very commonly used. This is typically used if you don't have a lot of competition, and secondly, if you want to do a very quick savings or very quick negotiation, right? I've seen some of the Dutch auctions finish within 4 minutes, right? 4 minutes, the auction's over. That's it, deal done, right? So that's the Dutch auction, and those are the most commonly, I think 99% of the auctions out there are either English, dynamic, Japanese, or Dutch, right? Cool. So moving forward, just some stats. As I mentioned earlier, you always eAuctions have been shown to and have been proven to deliver greater savings than face-to-face negotiations by almost 50%. So it's not just my experience; it's out there. eAuctions, the whole interactive bidding process puts slightly more pressure on the suppliers, and it's a very fair and transparent process for the suppliers and for the buyers. And you're able to achieve slightly higher savings than what you typically do with face-to-face negotiations, right? 90% of the auctions that I have seen and I have been involved in are pretty much dynamic auctions, right? That gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you set up the auction, gives you flexibility of how many suppliers you actually want to award the business to. So dynamic auction is really quite flexible, and that's what's the most sort of commonly used auction that we've seen. Average auction time is 30 to 45 minutes. We typically set the auction time for 30 minutes. And because we get 25% of the bids in the last 2 to 3 minutes, there's obviously, we always extend the time by 2 or 3 minutes to keep the competition going. And sometimes, we start at 30 minutes, end at 30 minutes, and still, suppliers are placing the bid, and it gets extended to 45 minutes or an hour. I think the longest auction that I was involved in was about 3 hours, where the suppliers just kept outbidding themselves. And every time the supplier outbids the other, the time just gets extended for the other supplier to respond. And they just played that game for almost 3 hours, until one finally put his head down and said, that's it. So typically 30 to 45 minutes, we set the auction for, and, quarter of a bid or most of the bid actually, come within the last 2 or 3 minutes. Right. Now talking about some of the myths and some of the stuff that we hear from our clients out there. A lot of people have this notion that e-auctions are only about price. And, we spoke about earlier of how you can incorporate e-auction as part of your sourcing process. And, it's really up to you to actually, how do you want to structure the e-auction, and how do you want to include that as part of your sourcing process and your evaluation process, right? So it's not purely about the price. You can also structure other things on the e-auction, such as payment terms, such as delivery terms, input terms, and other things on the e-auction. You can auction those things off as well, right? So it's not only about the price, and not always the best bidder wins the auction or gets the award. Second is, e-auction allows, this is also we hear, e-auction allows for unqualified suppliers to participate. No, you have to go through a pre-qualification process to be able to participate in an auction, whether you're following an RFP process or not, right? And finally, e-auctions damage supplier relationship. This is something that, we hear a lot. In my opinion, e-auctions are a fair and transparent process and gives all the suppliers equal opportunity to bid, in a transparent manner on the same platform. We do have this sort of resistance from some of the clients, but once we go through 1 or 2 auctions and they can actually see the benefit, not just the clients, not just the buyers, actually the suppliers also enjoy that whole bidding process, because it's transparent for them. They can see where they stand, and they know if they have lost the business, if they don't get the business, they know the reasons why they don't get the business. And I'm sure Chris is going to talk about that as well from his experience, recent experience of executing multiple auctions, and how to actually manage this whole messaging around supplier relationships internally with stakeholders. Moving to benefits, why should you look at eAuction? Obviously, as I mentioned, process consistency and transparency. It's the same process for all the suppliers. It's a transparent process for all the suppliers, and there's no chance, or there's no sort of room for deviation on any of those processes. Real-time comparison, you get real-time data during the interactive bidding process. You get real-time market information. What sort of price points you're able to achieve, what sort of price points the suppliers are able to go down to, and what the resulting savings are going to be. All that information is real time. Within 30 minutes, you have all that data and information available. And then the speed and agility and efficiency of the process. Like I said, if you do face-to-face negotiations or email negotiations with your vendors, pricing negotiations with your vendor takes a week to, whereas an interactive bidding process is pretty much done 30 minutes, 60 minutes, the process is done. You've got your award, you've got your supply, you've got your final pricing, right? So it really, really reduces the whole lead time of negotiation. Benefits to suppliers, immediate competitive feedback. So they get feedback immediately if they won the auction, if they're not won the business, and the reasons why they haven't won the business. Reduced cost of time and cost of sales. You don't need to have multiple meetings. In terms of selling, you have one window to compete with other bidders, and that's it. That's your chance and opportunity to land the business. And finally, it's a transparent process because, like I said, all the bidders are competing on the same platform at the same time, right? What eAuctions are not, they are not replacement for supplier relationships. They do not allow for unqualified suppliers to participate, because on any eAuction platform or tool, you have to give access to your qualified suppliers. Nobody can just pitch in and join the eAuction, and they do not automatically award business to the cheapest bidder, as I've mentioned earlier, right? So that is one thing that we hear all the time. Do I have to award to the cheapest bidder? No, if you use the right auction format, if you communicate with the suppliers, if the suppliers know what the auction rules are, you don't have to always award the contract to the cheapest bidder. Right, so before I hand over to Chris to talk about some of the success stories, I thought I'll just share with you some of the success stories on my side, some of the auctions that I have executed. So one of the auctions that I did was the logistics auction, which is quite complex. As you can see, we had about 1,500 bids on that auction. We had, about 6 different lots, 300 lanes. So it was quite a complex auction. When I say lanes, it's line items, right? 300 line items, which were divided into different lots, and we ran these auctions over a period of 2 days. Actually, these six lots were done over a period of 2 days. And we pushed almost 400 million rands spent through there, and we got about 7% average savings out of that over a 2-day period of time. Sorry. Another one we did was packaging. Very simple, very simplistic auction. We had this was quite competitive, and over 250 bids from these 6 suppliers. And it was about 225 million rand that we pushed through the auction, and it was quite a successful auction. And finally, an auction that we did for a client in China. It was all the Chinese suppliers, and it was consumables, chemicals and consumables. Again, very, very difficult auction this was due to the competition that was there. But yeah, it was quite an exciting auction that we did for a Chinese client. Right. So those are some of the success stories from my side. I hope I was able to give you a good overview of what an e-auction is, when you can actually use the e-auction, what you can actually e-auction. So I hope you have a much better understanding, if you didn't already, about e-auctions. And I hope that you'll be able to use e-auctions going forward in your organization to try and drive better value and deliver better savings for your company, right? So with that, I would like to now hand over to Chris. Chris, over to you.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think we can move on to the next slide that you've got prepared for us. Yeah, thanks everyone. Let me just clarify. I do have permission from Massmart to present today, but I'm not representing the business in any way. I cannot answer any questions regarding business updates, etc. But we will share, a view from a retailer's perspective in terms of how we see eAuctions and also how we work with Walmart, our shareholders, in terms of using the technology and the tool. And also, please keep in mind some of the data that's shared today is outdated. It doesn't relate to the current fiscal or financial year. So where did we start from a Massmart perspective? Well, we had no centralized procurement when it comes to our direct commodities or our indirect commodities or categories. And so our CFO had tasked me to head up the eAuction program for the group, looking at both sides of the business. I think normally when it comes to retail, your direct side of the business is goods for resale. So that's products that goes on the shelf. And your indirect categories are everything that supports the stores and the head office, etc. So it was the first time that we kind of combined a technology for both sides of the business. And there were no historic eAuctions on the indirect side of the business, but our goods for resale guys or the direct merchants or buyers had dabbled a little bit with eAuctions some 7 or 8 years ago. The technology was not great back then. It wasn't very successful. And so that bred some resistance within the group to looking at eAuctions again. And just keep that in mind. If some of you have had historic eAuction programs in your businesses, you're going to have to overcome some of that resistance. And we'll talk a little bit about how we did that in Massmart. And maybe there's some tips and tricks for you guys in there as well. Thanks, Manav. I think you can unpack the bottom section. So where were we after 1 year of running the program? So we had put through roughly over R1 billion of expenditure through our eAuction program with our eAuction partners, which Manav was a part of as well. We saw an average savings of about 9% per project. Now, keeping that in mind, that includes both the direct and indirect side. So that's a pretty high number from a retail perspective. We held about 17 individual eAuction events, so a little more than one per month, and over 85 suppliers participated. And this ranged from milk, cheese, fruit, right through to logistics that Manav mentioned, to cleaning. So really a diverse group of suppliers, and a high number participated as well. We did have some resistance from certain supplier groups, but as soon as the momentum grew and as soon as they saw their industry, compatriots participating in these events, resistance did drop significantly, and we could put a whole diverse type of supplier through this program. By the end of the year, we had received over 3,500 pricing bids. Now you can imagine how long that would take you to collate and work through if you were using traditional sourcing processes and sort of offline technology like Outlook or Excel, etc. It would almost be impossible to get through that amount of bids. The program was so successful that our shareholders, Walmart, awarded us a gold award for, in particular, the month we ran that logistics event through as well. So globally, we were being recognized, but also it shows the importance that Walmart place on this type of program. And that's one of the key stakeholder buying points that I'll make a bit later, is you really have to have top management support for this in order to recognize the people who put all their effort through these different events as well. And then finally, we had buy-in across both areas, across the group, from a direct, which were the merchants who buy our commodities, as well as indirect, which is what we call the ISM, or indirect spend management side. Thanks, Manav. You can move on to the next one. So not all eAuctions are created equal, right? So from a Walmart and a Massmart perspective, there were some major criteria we thought had to be met for something to qualify as an eAuction. So if you just have a supplier send you a price online, you're not really doing an eAuction. So we wanted to find a way to leverage technology during the supplier negotiation stage. And ideally, we wanted to switch from face-to-face negotiations to allow suppliers to submit their bids online. And we felt any commodity really could be put through this. We've spoken briefly about avoiding commodities where the brand preference is really strong. So one good example is we would not put branded TVs through this process where you'd have suppliers like Samsung and LG bid against each other. They have proprietary technologies, in those products. And so an e-auction isn't really suited for that type of, let's call it commodity. But for just about everything else, we thought it could work. And then, of course, for us, there's a bit of duplication here from what Manav shared earlier. But planning starts at the scoping stage. You don't really want to kick off an e-auction come negotiation time. You really want to consider it at step one of your sourcing event. And then what are the main characteristics for you to get the benefits out of it? It's got to be real time and online. You can't have delays in any system or any partner that you work with on e-auction. We noticed it helped drive supplier competition to a true market price. So for us as buyers, and I myself have a buying background and a sourcing background, we like to think we know what the price is. And sometimes we are the resistance to an e-auction program. But ultimately, this tool drives you to a true market price. And this removes kind of the hearsay about how good a negotiator are you, right? This is a true reflection of what the market price should be in a competitive environment. As Manav also said, it enables efficiency and transparency. So even the suppliers like to see where they sit in the market. They don't always have pricing feedback on how competitive they are on the market. So this type of process does benefit them from that perspective. And if you really want to have a debrief session with some of your bigger e-auctions, if there's hundreds of millions of rands at stake, it might be worth you sitting down with the second or third place suppliers to go through some data points with them, and they would really appreciate that. And that would encourage them to participate again in an e-auction process. And then, of course, we said it's not a standalone strategy, needs to be used with other criteria. So on the right-hand side is just a generic model of how we view supplier selection and where e-auction focuses. So in particular, it focuses on the price point, but the technology can be used to help you assess your non-commercial factors as well. So you've got things like bid transformation, etc. But ultimately, you don't want to do away with this model on the right-hand side because of an e-auction. And if you want to award during the e-auction, you need to have done a lot of homework beforehand on the non-commercial factors and be ready to go. But our view from a use of the tool perspective is that we felt we didn't want the supplier to win the full business based purely on the e-auction. We would then issue them letters after the e-auction process was complete. And they knew that fully and well going into the process. Thanks, Manav. I think we can move on from here. So just a couple of key stakeholder buying points. And please keep in mind, this is from an overall program perspective. You might not need to do all of this if you just want to run one or two e-auctions, right? If you've got a small to medium-sized business. But I generally recommend if you've got a medium to large business, you should have an e-auction program running across your group. And of course, you'll need a platform to communicate to your board or to your stakeholders how the program is running, because you're going to have to pay, right? There is a fee associated with running e-auctions, but the return on investment is massive. It's really nothing that you can compare to anything else that takes place within the business. And some examples of these platforms that we made use of was our quarterly CFO letter. We have a strip in there that we talk about e-auctions. We also issue a monthly update to the board of directors. So like a newsletter, and this circulates across Walmart and Massmart respectively as well. And it also becomes like a bit of a competition between all the markets, within our business in terms of who can do well, each month within e-auctions. I would also say communicating the financial and non-financial benefits when you're launching your program is really important. And this first point gets lost on a lot of individuals is that it drives price down across the winning supplier, which is first place on a price perspective, right through to last place. So that means if your business strategy is to award to the best quality supplier, eAuctions can still help you lower their price. It's not just about getting that lowest cost supplier down to the cheapest price. It really lowers the overall pool of suppliers that you could pick from when you run an event. Manav has also mentioned a second point there, market intelligence. I mean, to get 2,500 price points for a logistics event, I mean, you can't really buy that kind of data these days, and that really helps you understand your market a bit better. We've spoken a bit more about working for buyers and the shortened life cycle time, so I won't repeat there. But again, a good point to remember is this can revitalize competition within a tough market. So if you haven't been competitively bidding a commodity in the past, or you're not sure if it can even be done, this process can revitalize competition, and suppliers who think they have a monopoly or who think they have a stranglehold on your business can really be surprised to see other competitors within an eAuction event. And obviously, you want them to have this kind of real-time open feedback, and they can see what's going on in the market as well. So moving on to point number 3, a good thing is to manage questions, myths, and common objections from your stakeholders. We'll get to that in the last slide. Some good examples of how we manage that with our stakeholders there. I think point number 4 is important. If you have a program sponsor, which in my case was the group CFO, you really need to leverage them to help you develop a pipeline of ideas. So you don't really want to approach your business and say, hey guys, we think eAuction can work, and then sort of move on to some vague project descriptions. You really want to get in there and say, guys, we think these 4 or 5 pilot ideas can work. And then you get funding for your pilot ideas, and they'll prove to be a success. And then from then you can get regular funding and launch a whole program with a pipeline. And that's kind of the approach we took, and that worked really well for us. Our first year, as you saw, was a pilot year, and now we've got a fully fledged eAuction program running within the group. I think a last point before we just cover myths is around having some structure. So, there's no free lunch, right? The savings are great with the eAuction program, but supplier trainings are critical. You don't want to run an eAuction event and your suppliers don't know how to use the software. A good eAuction partner or consultant can help you with that. That's not something you need to do on your own. We also built some checklists. We built a RACI model for us to understand what our eAuction partner will do and what we need to do. And then, of course, we also run a 7-step sourcing process, and this is part of that. So that's around having your sourcing strategies and your category strategies and building this into that from the start. Thanks, Manav. I think you can move on to the last slide. So common myths and objections. Sorry, we've spoken a bit about criteria. So yes, we should use a completely weighted scorecard unless something is highly commoditized. And even then, lead time, delivery on time still needs to be considered. So keep your weighted scorecard in place. And, the more advanced eAuction platforms can even help you assess those qualitative criteria through the eAuction as well. But at the moment for us, we're doing that through SAP Ariba and through an offline process, and we're focusing on price through eAuctions. One key piece, and this was something that was raised early on, is suppliers should not be able to opt out of the eAuction process. This is something that can really see your program collapse. And you need to communicate to the suppliers that this will be the only and final way to submit pricing. You don't want what we call backdoor selling or pre-selling, where the suppliers will say, we don't want to participate, we'd like to opt out. Make sure it's a stringent requirement in your RFX process. Again, another objection is around qualitative factors. We've spoken about that. There's no benefits for suppliers. That's a common objection. Look, the truth is suppliers would love to know where they rank in the market. They'd love to see how they stack up against, the more expensive guys, the cheaper guys. And of course, it's fair and open. It's no longer based around how good a relationship they have with the buyer. This is really transparent from their perspective. Again, next point, eAuctions automatically being awarded, that's up to your discretion. We generally recommend not doing it. We'd like to issue an award letter to the supplier, but you can definitely award it once the eAuction is complete. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And then again, the last 2 points, these are also common objections from suppliers. How legal is this? Can't I just give you my price offline? And then, of course, the big one, I'll give you a sizable discount not to proceed with the eAuction. Well, my reaction to that one is always, well, why aren't we already giving that discount, right? You know, if it's available for us as a customer, your pricing should be good. But ultimately, the bids are legally binding. We need to make the suppliers aware of that. No offline bids. You've got to be really strong with that. You know, a 5% drop in price is very sort of tempting to avoid an eAuction process. But just imagine what more you leave on the table now if you take advantage of that pre-selling offer from the supplier. And then finally, a lot of common objections around the technology. So suppliers say they're not comfortable with it. What if something goes wrong, etc. And again, things like trainings is critical for the vendors. And use a tried and tested partner. You know, the technology we've used have run thousands of events globally. It's really well tested. And there's an event adjudicator, you know, who manages the eAuction for you should something go wrong. And then usually the buyer pays. I say usually, some businesses, you know, ask their supplier to pay, but our standpoint is, you know, we as a buyer should be paying for this type of technology. And that's it from my side. So hopefully this was useful for you guys, and you know, it's something that can help you kick off an eAuction program and not just do 1 or 2 isolated events. And yeah, maybe I can hand over to Media C from here.
Wow, thank you very much, Chris and Manav. I think I both want you here on stage. Where is Manav? If you can just come through as well. So we just need to remove the slide and bring Manav on. I really enjoyed this, sincerely. I mean, it was very clear the way you just presented the information. I'm not sure if we've got a general understanding of auctions, but the way you just tied it in, you know, just made sense to the ordinary person. And so I just wanted to thank you for that. But I'm just thinking, I'm a CPO sitting in my office and I report into finance. Now I need to get this because the value proposition of this is there. I mean, there's no questions about that. How do I go about that? Where do I even start this process? You know, to tell people that, yes, we've been doing it this way, but this is more effective. How do I create that buy-in with the senior guys within my organization? Could I start with you, maybe Chris, and Manav, you could add as well?
Yeah, I think for us, we had to get some costings per event. And based on that costings, we decided on an average return on investment. We were very conservative. We said 5%. And we said, based on this 5%, it's got to cover the cost of this event and give us a significant saving to the business. And once we had that rough idea of a proof of concept on paper, we approached our CFO and stakeholders in partnership with Walmart. So Walmart also had success stories that they shared in this sort of pitch. And we said, you know, give us money for these 5 big events. And they said, fine, great, here's the money, go after it. And then post the 5 events, we said to them, okay, this is what it's going to take to build a program, a regular program. And then that's when the funding came through. And obviously the post review of those 5 events showed a higher return on investment than what we forecast, you know. And we did this in partnership. Manav helped us with it. And he was already involved with the Walmart guys. So also sharing other success stories helps. You know, you don't want to come and say, this is a great idea that we've come up with. It's actually been in the marketplace for procurement for over a decade now. It's tried and tested. So we almost came with the approach of, we're a little bit behind, you know, to not have this technology, and guys are running away with this. And so those were some of the key points that we stopped.
Yes, that's beautiful. Thank you very much. Manav, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so immediacy, look, I mean, in South Africa, we're quite behind, right? There's only a few organizations who have or who are doing e-auctions. Not a lot of organizations are. And, you know, Massmart started, what, about in 2019 when we started with Massmart. But we're behind. I mean, we already have sort of, you know, case studies, enough case studies from Europe, from US, from Asia Pacific, where companies are doing it. But those are just case studies and material. Those are just theories, right? I think what our view or you know what we tell our clients is to let's start with one. Let's take one commodity or category. Let's do an e-auction, right? And when we do that e-auction, let's bring all the stakeholders into the room when that whole bidding process is happening, so that they can actually see it in action. You know how an e-auction happens, or how e-auction takes a course in action. So that's our view, and that's what we tell our clients. Let's take one or two categories, your low-hanging fruits, your easy ones, and let's start. And we know how to structure the auction properly, so that we know we get the right results that we're looking for in terms of the savings. And we know that this auction is going to be successful, and we know that the stakeholders are going to have look at it, and they're going to say, this is like really cool, and let's go for it, right? So that's the sort of once you do one or two, that builds the momentum. But it's important to get your senior stakeholders involved, get them into the room, get them to view the auction, get them to view the whole process, get them to understand the whole process. From there you can build the momentum and then start doing e-auctions for slightly more complex categories.
Yeah, good stuff. There's a comment there from Yash on the chat. He says they're not sure if I agree with using e-auctions to collect and then evaluate, manipulate, and adjust offline. What do you make of that? How would you respond to that?
It depends on your preference and the maturity of your stakeholders. So the technology allows you to take both approaches, which is fully online, everything done up front and awarded, but it also lets you do offline evaluation. So our choice was, our market, we considered it very immature, so much so that we were also kicking off a weighted scorecard process that the business wasn't used to. So we said, we're going to keep that process offline, but we're going to introduce e-auctions on a price basis. So kind of like a phased approach, get your stakeholders used to it. And to Manav's point, once your CEO and your stakeholders are in that room and they see that line dropping and they equate that with savings, they get very excited, And so, you want to get that excitement first before you start to introduce a slightly more complex process of doing qualitative assessments through an e-auction platform. But you can do it. And in a mature market, that is what they do, 100%.
I would argue that you are taking out the human factor into the process now. Is this ultimately what it is about? Negotiate online, no supplier relationship. Manav, how do you respond to that? I'm just asking here.
Yeah, immediacy. So it takes the human factor out purely on that negotiation process, right? All you're doing is using e-auction purely as your negotiation tool or negotiation instrument, right? But you still need to, once the supplier is chosen, you still need to manage that supplier on an ongoing basis. So all you're doing is negotiating price on this tool, but you still have your contract, you still have your service levels, your quality checks, and all of that in place as part of your process, which you've already built into this process, right? So yeah, e-auction is not replacing your supplier relationships. You still need to maintain that, on an ongoing basis. All you're doing is creating one single platform for your suppliers to come and compete for the business. And there are cases where you could run an e-auction on a periodic basis, right? Not just one. I mean, a few clients, they say, we have a set of 4 suppliers, and we want to keep calling them on e-auction for every quarter or every 6 months or every 12 months. And we want to give different suppliers opportunity to come and compete with the business, right? So yeah, look, I mean, yes, a lot of clients say you're taking the human factor, but I think you're just taking the human factor out purely from a negotiation perspective. You're trying to level the playing field for everybody. And as Chris mentioned earlier, you're trying to get the market price, or whatever the market price for that category or service is, through this interactive process. Right? That's
beautiful. Yeah, no, it's a very, very strong point there you make, Manav. Thank you very much. So there's a comment here. I guess it comes out to one of the questions I wanted to ask: can this work in public sector? So the gentleman Harvey there is asking, are there any case studies perhaps in South Africa, for example?
Can I answer that? This
Yes,
can definitely, and in my opinion, the government should be using eAuctions to select suppliers because of the transparency of this process. So yes, this is submitting your best and final offer, your pricing. You can still follow your tender process, as per your PFMA or triple PFA. You can do the pre-qualification based on BEE and your technical criteria. And when it comes to the pricing round, you open it up for e-auction and get the bidders to submit pricing through an e-auction rather than closed envelopes that our government does right now. So in my opinion, this is probably the best process for our government to procure goods and services.
I like that response, Manav, because this is best practice. And really, it should not just be restricted to private sector. It should work in government alike because it's really about best practice. So thank you very much for that response. I do have one more poll I want to push here before we end. I see we have 2 questions, but as that poll comes, Manav, maybe very briefly, we don't have much time for this. Are there any risks that you have picked up, just like any tool or whatever the case might be? What would you advise me on, broadly speaking?
Yeah, so look, I mean, we've covered a lot of risks. I mean, Chris has covered a lot of risks. I think there's 2 risks that I may want to highlight. One is potential risk of collusion. That is always there, where the suppliers are talking to each other and the suppliers are talking to each other during the event. It doesn't happen a lot of times, but it has happened before in some of the events that I've run. And that's when the suppliers know who are the other bidders, right? So you want to try and limit that information as to who else is bidding or who are the other bidders on the platform as much as you can to try and eliminate the risk of collusion. And there's another risk of collusion between your procurement and the suppliers. So we've also seen an event where information during the event was being passed on to the suppliers by somebody sitting inside the room, right? So we've had those instances where we had to ask all the people to leave their cell phones out of the room when the event is happening, right? So no information can be passed on to the supplier, right? So that's a bit extreme. But yes, those are certain risks that we've come across. Chris, maybe from your side, if there's any other that you've encountered.
Yeah, I think the one major risk we saw is what I already mentioned, which is backdoor selling. So that means after the event, a supplier who lost the event comes with a lower price than the winning supplier offline. And that's where you're going to have to lean on your principles and ethics as a business. Bring in your CEO, your CFO, and just say, thank you, but no thank you. We stand by this process that we've issued to you guys. And next time, please come with your best price. And we did have that with one supplier. And basically, we had to escalate, speak to their CEO. It was a top-to-top meeting. And that supplier is still participating now in seasonal e-auctions for us. So the way we managed that was well, it was fair. We didn't assume the worst from the supplier. We just spoke to them about the process and our principles. And now today, everything's fine with them. But that is a risk, and it can undermine your ethics as a business and your integrity within the market. So you really have to have senior buy-in to stick to your guns with this type of program.
Guys, thank you very much for these comments. But I can also add, really, in all fairness, these are risks that can be available anywhere else, So I was being unfair to you, Manav, by trying to ask you this directly. Unethical behavior can be anywhere for any process. And so I just didn't want to narrow it down and leave it open like that. But I think that was good response. Thank you very much, guys, for your responses. Please, can I have that poll again? I'm keen to know what's going on now. All right. There is the question, simple answers, please respond. And there's another question, Manav. Maybe I know we are past the 1 hour mark, but I think it's a good one. You know, have you experienced any specific POPI guided appeals from bidders to restrict bidding data transparency?
Yeah, so I'm not sure how much that is related to POPI. It is, I mean, an e-auction is a confidential process. And like I said, if you don't use only the English auction that allows bidders to see what the winning bid is, right? The other auctions do not allow the bidders to actually see what other suppliers' bids are. So it is a confidential process. Only the buyer can see the supplier's bid. The suppliers do not see each other's bid. So, you know, similar to an RFP or an RFQ process, where only you are privy to the bids that you're receiving. So it's a highly confidential process. So I don't know if there's any risk of you know the bidders' data leaked to other bidders. Yeah.
To answer the question, no, we haven't had any suppliers raise the issue with us with regards to POPI. But to Manav's point, you determine the level of transparency. So we don't put suppliers' names. We say supplier A, supplier B. And in certain formats, the supplier can only see their next closest bid. You know, they can't see the leading bid. So all POPI sort of issues get addressed in the supplier training. And that's why I say that session is critical. But to date, no, we haven't had any complaints. We haven't had any issues. And we almost 2 years into our program.
Thank you very much, guys. Manav, please drop your email in the chat. I know that people may want to talk to you later on, but thank you so much. We thoroughly enjoyed this insight, and I really love the way you simplified this. For me, everything made sense, and great job there, guys. Thank you so much. Just for everyone to take note, my next webinar is going to be on the 26th of August, and this is about the future of procurement in a digital world. And yeah, we are looking forward to having you again, same time at 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock. Thank you very much. Until next time, have a great day further.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.